Okay, so Stan the Bamboo Man, they really have to make this guy into a movie character. Totally blows your mind. But first, it's essential that you get a little bit of background on what in the world I was doing as a kid. And that was working at a bamboo grove. And we actually went on house calls. Yes, people would call us up and say, "Huh, hello, my bamboo is sick. Would you come immediately and heal it?" Things like that. Like, who does a house call for bamboo plants? But hey, that's what we did. It was great money. Just very eccentric people love bamboo. I don't understand. And one such very eccentric person was Stan, who we fondly referred to as Stan the Bamboo Man, because this man, he swore that bamboo would save the world. Those are his words, not mine. All right, so we went down to the Green River Valley, which, there are some sections that are very, very thick and tangled, and it took us quite a long time to find his house. All we saw was sort of this wrought iron fence and an eerie amount of bird feeders, which is kind of frightening when there's a lot of them everywhere. Maybe like 15 are okay, but hundreds everywhere. Bird feeders. Who is this man? And so here we are, in our car, and I remember waiting for the longest time for this guy, and we couldn't get through this gate. We couldn't get to the house until finally this gentleman jumped out from the bushes from across the street. Not where his home address was. And I don't know how long he'd been there. And out jumped this guy who, let me describe him to you. He was sort of an older fellow, so I don't know, maybe 50s, 60s or so, but very spry. He had a spring in his step, very, very nice fellow. White hair, but sort of buzzed cut, and some glasses that were sort of half broken. And when he spoke, he sort of sounded like Winnie the Pooh. I know, what a character. All right, all right, all right. So he was like, "Well, I need you to go onto this property and get some bamboo plants for me." And my boss, Wade, was like, "Why don't you get them yourself?" He's like, "Well, I just sold the house, and technically, I have a restraining order on myself from the people on me, and I can't go onto this property to reclaim my possessions." So imagine buying a house and you're there eating breakfast, and you look outside and there's the guy who sold you your house, and he's out in his yard getting his plants. so so evidently it was kosher for the people to let others onto the property to get this man's possessions. Poor Stan. All he wanted was his precious bamboo plants. Wow, the house itself, I don't know why someone would buy a house like this, because it was like this really steep pitched roof with no walls to it. It's like the roof just went right down into the ground, sort of like it was this underground bunker. It was a weird house, let alone the feeders. What the heck? All right, so we went onto the property, and I have never, ever seen so many bamboo plants before in my entire life. At one point, Wade said, "See that variety over there? Yeah. That's that's the rarest bamboo. He said, I didn't even know that existed outside of the country of Chile." He said, technically, it's not supposed to exist in the United States because bamboo grows extremely fast, and which like a weed. And so the United States is very, very careful with bamboo. If it gets into the soil, it can just spread, and it's extremely difficult to annihilate. All right, so here are these crazy plants and this crazy guy, and it's just in the dead of summer, and it really felt as if I was in Vietnam, minus people trying to kill me. I'm not trying to glorify my job or anything like that, but you know what I mean. Going through the jungles, and it's sticky and it's scratchy and there are bugs everywhere. That's what I mean by it felt like Vietnam, okay? Don't get offended. "Hey, you weren't in the military. How dare you impersonate an officer?" Anyway, we got these plants, And not the entire root balls, because the entire things were as big as cars, huge. So we'd have these big giant bars and we'd thrust them into the root balls and we'd pry. And I remember these thick bars actually bent. These plants were so massive and so heavy. And my buddy Steven and I, we got these thick calluses on our hands pulling these things out. And this gig lasted for several days. And I remember pulling these big plants out, dragging them out to the road, and just absolutely exhausted. Put them out there on the road, and then there was Stan out there waiting, and his little sticky voice got all excited, and he'd sort of trot up to this bamboo plant, lift it up by himself. Like, we're talking 200, 300 pound root balls, massive things. And he'd pick it up and disappear on into the opposite side of the street. And there Stephen and I would just kind of look at each other. I mean, we could barely, between the two of us, drag these things off of the property, let alone pick them up. Who was this man? At one point, when Stan was meeting us out on the street, and he leaned over to pick up one of his precious bamboo plants, and his glasses fell off, and he kind of chuckled to himself, and you could tell he had a joke in his head, and so he leaned over, picked up his glasses, and they're kind of held together by a rubber band, and he said, "Well, I guess my glasses are falling apart, just like my life." He picked up the root ball and walked into the woods. he, he, I don't know if he had a lot of company, because he really imparted a lot of his dreams and aspirations on these two 13-year-old guys. And one of which was his ultimate dream and goal was to have 5 Swedish wives. I don't know why that has stuck with me for 15 years, but 5 Swedish wives. That was his life goal. And you may be wondering, so where did he live on the opposite side of the street? Well, Stephen and I never actually found out. However, according to our boss, he, he this was when the job was done and we were driving on our way back. And oh, I wish he had told us earlier, because I wanted to see where Stan lived. And Wade said there was a 5-story tall, wait, was it 5 or 3? Regardless, there were many stories to this thing, as in floors, stories, not stories, but floors. It was a sheet metal pyramid that Stan had built deep within the woods. Yeah, wanted to see it so bad. And we were like, what did he have in there? Expecting like dead bodies? And Stan was like, no, it was normal for the most part, except for a few weird odds and ends. A giant black tank out front with a toilet propped up on it. Evidently, that's where he went. Okay, all right, that's cool. You know those terracotta Chinese statues of people who, ancient emperors in China would have these full-size statues standing guard in their tombs. He had one of these, and we were like, well, Wade, it could have been a replica. People have things like that all the time in their houses. And he was like, no, this thing was pretty legit. I think it was real. So Stan the Bamboo Man, who was this man? What has happened to him? I don't know. He didn't explain to us how bamboo was going to save the world. But one day, when a giant root ball descends from heaven and speaks unto people and says, I am timber bamboo. I am here to save your souls. Then, and only then, you will know that Stan the Bamboo Man, he was right all along.